Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. This week I'll be reviewing Cory Doctorow's science fiction novel Walkaway. I'll talk very briefly about the author, go into a spoiler-free overview of the plot, talk about what I liked about the book, what I didn't like about the book, who I'd recommend the book to, and finish off with what I'll be reading for next time. Cory Doctorow is a science fiction author and blogger. He's also, known for pushing for the liberalization of copyright laws. He feels they're too strict, and one of his beliefs is they should be less stringent. And to that end, he is a published science fiction author, and so his stuff, Little Brother, and also Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom, I believe they are available online, free of copyright. You're able to download those and share them as you want to. Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom, I know for sure, garnered a lot of attention when that came out like 10, 15 years ago. Little Brother, I think, was nominated possibly for a Hugo or a Nebula. So he's done some work in the past that has been recognized by the science fiction community. In this book, Walkaway is set in the near future, and society has basically fractured to the point where Zetas, who are essentially his word for the 1%, so these are billionaires approaching trillionaire status, have privatized most things in this world and have used that influence to make lives really difficult for a lot of people. And so this idea of walkaways are people who have decided to leave society, reclaim areas in the wilderness. This book is mostly set in Canada. Some parts are set in upstate New York, but most of it's in Canada. So it's their idea to reclaim this kind of wilderness area for their own, setting up mutual aid or anarchic syndicates, mini societies without certain rules and regulations and money and things like that. So it's this kind of mutual aid idea. And using kind of the technology that has advanced to the point where they're able to do this, where they're able to use machines in order to gather material and to use really advanced wireless communication technology in order to download what are essentially user documents, user requirement documents in order to create this stuff. You have the addition as well as 3D printing material and things like that to kind of live in a world without the need for people specializing in different roles and without kind of the need for capitalism. So the book really concerns one character whose name is Natalie. Her father is one of these Zetas. She leaves what they call default, which is kind of what we would see as like a big city and people working in cities. She leaves this default in order to join this walkaway society. And in doing so, she goes on various adventures and meets people. One of them is a group that is working on uploading consciousness to the cloud. So essentially, you'd be able to live forever. Your digital self would be able to live forever. And this draws the attraction of the Zetas. And the rest of the book is really a fight between the Zetas and the walkaways. And that's essentially the main plot of the book. There's about, half a dozen main characters. And so what I thought was cool about the book was that there are a lot of ideas in the book, and a lot of them I think are really important to talk about and discuss. If you were looking for something that's a realistic look at what would happen if we got closer and closer to this idea of like post-scarcity. So if technology had basically advanced to the point where solar and wind energy were relatively easy to set up, you have 3D printing making technology that's relatively cheap, and you have the ability to communicate with people with little to no cost through wireless technology or whatever it may be. You have the ability to become self-sufficient a lot easier, and some people have decided to, again, kind of leave society and form their own, I don't want to call them communes, but they're essentially like we would call them, the idea is they're essentially mutual aid or commune societies. And so the idea that, post-scarcity is going to come and that there's going to be a flip that we switch and everyone's going to move from one form of governing to another just probably will not happen. So it's probably going to be something similar to this, where there's dissatisfied people who just leave and form their own societies in kind of the wilderness or areas that have been toxic waste sites or whatever it may be in the past in order to live in an alternate way. So I thought that was really interesting and part of the book. I thought that was done relatively realistically. I'll get to it. I had some issues with it, but I'll get to those in a second. But just that main concept I thought was interesting. I think some of the concepts of the characters were pretty interesting. There's one character who is a scientist, but her consciousness becomes uploaded into this cloud. And the idea that she is I don't know if he ever explicitly says that she's manic depressive or bipolar, but the fact that she has those features in her mind paradoxically strengthens this network. And I thought that was kind of a cool and interesting idea. And then finally, there's several different sex scenes in the book, and I do like the fact that he exhibited enthusiastic consent in one of the sex scenes. I thought that was actually a really good thing to do to show what that could look like, and so I will give him props for that. The things that I didn't like about the book were pretty much everything else about the book. I thought that the book was really strangely paced. If I had to say there's like one thing that I just really had a hard time with the book, Cory Doctorow has very strong political opinions, and this book, in my opinion, this novel would have worked much better as a collection of essays where he could have said, this is my opinion, and because this is my opinion, no one can really, I mean, you could argue with people's opinions back and forth with evidence and whatnot, but you don't need to necessarily put your viewpoints in other characters. You don't really necessarily have to have depth of characters or motivation for characters or deal with pacing or any of those things. In a novel, you have to deal with all those things. And so my biggest issue with this book is it feels much more like he wanted to write an essay, but instead wrote a novel. And it feels like there are multiple passages in the book there's really just two characters arguing back and forth. And it feels like a lot of times it was like Cory has his opinions, and instead of setting up like two characters who have real opposing opinions, it was like one character believed what Cory believed, the other person put up like the barest defense or a rebuttal to what he said, and the first person just went over them. And so I saw that again and again and again. The book, the characters in the book are relatively thin. Sometimes there are characters who are given some backstory, but the pacing, like I said before, is really strange. So some of those backstories come like 70% of the way through. You learn that one of the characters is Black Canadian, and then he talks for like a page about how that has affected him in terms of his desire to be a walkaway. And it just feels like something that was just like thrown in, and you're like startled, and you're like, well, why didn't you tell me this earlier in the book? That could have been like part of his character, understanding who this character is and why he feels that way. And it's just kind of, whenever anything like that happened, it happened a few times, it just felt like speed bumps on the plot. The plot itself is oftentimes really confusing, and you just kind of find yourself there. Cory has a lot of terminology that I wasn't really thrown off that much by it, but there are times where he explains certain things, and there are times where he doesn't explain anything. So he stops the book to tell you that Groundhog's Day is a 1993 movie starring Bill Murray, and you're like, oh, I knew that already, but thank you, Cory. But he doesn't explain several different, like if you didn't know what unpiloted aerial vehicle was, a UAV, he doesn't try to explain to you. He doesn't explain what, I think it's UNHCR. I guess you could look at all these things. When I think an onsen. So there's several terms in the book that I don't think are really in common vernacular that he just throws out. And some of them I don't know he may have made up, and some of them he didn't, but he doesn't really try to explain that much of the book. The characters, like I said, are relatively thin. He starts the book in what feels like a really strange place. And I like the opening scene because it did remind me a little bit of William Gibson in Neuromancer, because it's the scene at the party. But he really could have, without really losing very much, moved the start of the action much closer to the end of the book. And the book feels a little long because of that. Especially, I'd say the last 30 or 40 pages really, in my opinion, dragged out. And it's supposed to be this really climactic scene, but it just doesn't flow with any pacing. He doesn't really tell you in the book how much time has passed. And so these characters keep making references to how much they've changed in a period of time. And you're like, I don't know how much time has passed because he hasn't told me, And so I felt there was really basic things that you should be able to do as an author that he doesn't do. And then at one point at a time, he tells us it's 2071, but again, I don't know how much time has passed, so I don't know how much time these characters have spent together. And so that to me was really frustrating, and that was like, I wanted to like this book. I think there's a lot of interesting ideas. I recommend reading the book for people who just like science fiction and ideas in general. But if you're looking for like a novel that has things like realistic characters, a plot that you can follow, pacing, if you're looking for those things, a character who is a villain but still has like internal motivations that don't make him like an out-and-out monster, I felt like those are all things that there's a little level of skill there that for some reason wasn't in this book. There's several sex scenes, like I said before, that may bother you, that may not bother you. I don't think the sex scenes themselves were written particularly poorly. They just feel kind of bolted on and gratuitous, and they don't really add anything to your understanding of the characters or this world or really any of that thing. They just kind of felt there. And so that didn't necessarily bother me, other than the fact that they could have been cut, you wouldn't lose anything. So it was more, again, kind of a pacing and a length thing. I'm just going over my notes to kind of see if there's anything else. Yeah, and I guess finally, just the whole time I was reading it, he, like I said, has very strong political opinions. And I think, to me, I'm not really that bothered by it. But if you kind of make your characters virtuous, and smart or evil and dumb based on your political opinions, that I do have a problem with. So it's basically like if you agree with Cory's political opinions, you are virtuous and smart, and if you're not, you're evil and dumb. I had a problem with that. And so a lot of the characters, again, if you buy into this idea that there's this society and people have different beliefs, I think that's fine. I think a lot of times in the book there's contradictions and things that he wants you to believe that don't quite make a lot of sense. Like he wants you to believe that this one character is almost a deity in this world and that she's right all the time, but he doesn't explain why she's right all the time. And so it's like one of those things where if you're a doctor, you're an expert in the law, and people would say, okay, well, you're a doctor, I defer to your opinion, or you're a lawyer, I defer to your opinion. She's just right because she's right. And so it's this weird idea that if you're able to articulate your opinion the best, you're going to be right in terms of, instead of like you have some lived experience or some knowledge. I felt was just kind of strange. He has a sense of humor that I don't share. So again, kind of going back to when you're first getting into the novel, there's a character whose name is Seth. The character's name is Seth, and another character calls him Steve. And you're like, okay, well, he's made this joke that clearly this one character who's not calling this other character by his name, that's like a neg, or she just is showing how little she feels about him. And it just kind of goes on and on and on. And he like underlines it, hangs a lantern on it, and you're just like, you've done this 4 times, and I just don't understand, like, what is the joke? Is the joke she just like has some kind of difficulty remembering? And there is no joke. It's just kind of Cory's sense of humor. There's a character whose name is Hubert, etc., because he has 20 names. And so for the first like quarter of the book, he's called Hubert, etc., which, doesn't make any sense at all. You're just like, you just call him Hubert. That's what you would call him. Even if a person has multiple names, you wouldn't. Anyway, so that's the book. There are people who will like this book. I have mixed feelings because I think the concept of itself is interesting. And if you like reading kind of political theory almost in a book, you'll like this. If your political ideas align more with Cory's, you may like this. But he's clearly someone who has contempt for certain people, and beyond having contempt for those people, he also thinks they're all idiots. And you're just like, well, I don't know if they're all idiots, Cory. They can't all be idiots. But he thinks they're all idiots. And I wish that the execution of the book lived up to like the basic idea of having this society that has walked away and has problems. I wish there had been more nuance in all of it. It was just very like single note, good and bad, us versus them. And it just was like, which is fine. And I think maybe that's part of the book is he has to kind of explain these ideas because they are so radical to a lot of people. I just wish, again, there had been a little bit more nuance. And I think his version of nuance and my version of nuance maybe aren't the same. I do wish there had been a little bit more gray in all this. But that's the Walkaway. And like I said, that's Walkaway, a novel by Cory Doctorow. And like I said, if you are someone who reads science fiction for less of like a philosophical, like I kind of compare this to Ted Chiang in the sense that Ted Chiang will write philosophical science fiction, so technology that changes and how it affects your experience as a person. Whereas this Walkaway was like technology will change, technology changes society, and how does that affect society as a whole? And so, so that's Walkaway by Cory Doctorow. Wish it had been a stronger novel, even if I liked some of the ideas. Next time I will be reading it. Unfortunately, I don't have a cover because I will reading it on ebook, but There Goes the Neighborhood is the name of the book. Until next time, if you have read this book and you have different feelings about it, please let me know below. If you haven't, please subscribe to the channel. I'll leave my Twitter link below if you want to check me out there. Until next time, bye.